Well, in his last dying breath before leaving office, President Biden has given Ukraine authorization to start using long-range weapons to attack Russia. The timing of all of this is very interesting, according to the New York Times, and then confirmed by the Wall Street Journal that, yes, this is in fact the case. And just a short time ago, the son of George Soros posted on X, "This is great news," that President Biden has for the first time authorized Ukrainian forces to use Western-made long-range weapons to strike inside Russia. Well, Putin has responded, and our next guest is the former UN weapons inspector, former U.S. Marine Scott Ritter, who posted on Telegram just a short time ago that this is an existential threat to Russia and really a pivotal moment in this war, and we wanted to invite Scott on to provide some analysis. Scott, great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So how do you believe, there's been a lot of big moments in this war. Do you think this perhaps is the most pivotal moment right now? And why do you think it's an existential threat for the future of Russia?
Well, first, let's start with two things. One, this isn't the first time that this issue has come up to the White House level. If you recall, back in September 13th, Joe Biden held a meeting at the White House. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, came to this meeting with a British diplomatic pouch inside which were documents that Starmer wanted Biden to sign, authorizing Great Britain to release the Storm Shadow cruise missiles so that Ukraine could strike targets deep inside Russia, and also have the United States do the same thing with the ATACMS missile. The day before, September 12th, Vladimir Putin made an appearance on television and said, if this happens, it will be a declaration of war against Russia and will be treated accordingly. That the United States and Great Britain will have become parties to the conflict. NATO will have become a party to the conflict. On September 13th, because apparently Biden didn't get the message, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations made the same thing, that a declaration of war will have been made if this happens. The Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, was in conversation, was called by people close to the Biden administration, no longer in government, but still talking, saying, is this true? And Antonov said, yes. Not only that, the United States will not be able to hide behind the Atlantic Ocean, that this war will go nuclear and the targets will include the United States. And at that point in time, Joe Biden backed off. We were one signature away from global annihilation. The reason why I bring this up is nothing has changed in the Russian calculus. Nothing has changed. Russia has said that these missiles cannot be used without being directly handled by the United States, that the targeting is done by the United States. Every aspect of the launch procedures is done by the United States, so that if these missiles are used against Russian soil, it will be an American attack against Russia, and that's an act of war. Russia will treat it as such and respond accordingly. They said the same thing about the French Scalp missiles and the British Dark Shadow, I think it is, missiles. So the whole world knows where Russia stands on this. Now, many in Europe have said that Russia is bluffing, and many have been calling for the United States to call Russia's bluff. They don't believe that Russia will carry these actions out. Now, before we go on to the thing, I can say this, that Russian sources in Moscow, close to the leadership, have not yet convinced themselves that this is not a psychological warfare information operation being carried out by actors. I remind you that the Washington Post reported with some authority about a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that never took place. And yet they made that report based upon sources inside the Trump team. Here we have unnamed sources from the New York Times making this claim. The Wall Street Journal is what? Confirming the unnamed sources? Who knows? But what we don't have is an official statement by the United States government. And so the Russians right now appear to be taking a wait and see attitude. But as it was emphasized, The decisions have already been made. The idea that Russia is going to go into some sort of conclave where Putin is going to be asking people what to do, how do we respond, is absurd because, as Vladimir Putin and his inner circle have said, the decision has already been made. If you attack us, we will treat this as an attack against Russia by the United States, and we will act accordingly, meaning we will strike targets not just in Ukraine, but in the nations that have attacked us. This is as clear a signal as can be. The Russians haven't deviated from their position one iota. And so the other thing I was told too is that Russia, and this is playing off of a statement made by a senior Russian politician in the Russian Senate. He said that Russia will use weapons that have never been seen before, and these weapons will have a catastrophic effect on Kiev, on Ukraine. Basically, it will depopulate Kiev and make Ukraine non-functional as a modern nation state. Now, there's some speculation as to what these weapons are. They're not nuclear. The belief is that they are some sort of massive fuel air explosive / EMP weapon, electromagnetic pulse weapon that will flatten Kiev and take out all electronics. And this is being made by a man who isn't outside of the government, but in the government, and he's saying it as a statement of fact. So that's what we have to look forward to. If Ukraine does this, there's a good chance Kiev will cease to exist.
So I just want to unpack that. They believe at this point, according to your sources, that they haven't convinced themselves that this isn't some sort of a psychological game being played right now by Washington. In other words, so whatever the puppet masters are trying to do, because it's certainly not Biden. I mean, he's out to lunch. It's certainly not Kamala Harris. She's out to a wine lunch. So who exactly is running the show behind the scenes right now and trying to play this game? Do you believe there's truth to the fact that there are long-range weapons ready to be used? I mean, I know they've agreed to it. Do you think that, I guess I'm just trying to unpack that, where they sort of sit right now. Are they scrambling on red alert inside of Moscow right at this moment?
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Yeah. We know that they have the weapons. The United States has given them ATACMS weapons. The United States, Great Britain has given them the Storm Shadow. That's what it is, Storm Shadow. And France has given them the Scalp missile. So these weapons are in the possession of Ukraine. And indeed, Ukraine has used these weapons against Russian forces in the territories of dispute. And this is why Russia hasn't treated those attacks as an attack against Russia proper, because those territories, the Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and even Crimea, are considered territories in dispute by Ukraine. Kursk is not a territory in dispute. Kursk is a land which is part of the Russian Federation. And this is the other thing people need to understand. The United States and NATO helped train, equip, and direct the Ukrainian forces that invaded Kursk earlier this year. This was a NATO invasion of Ukraine. And now what appears to be the case is that the United States and NATO want Ukraine to remain in Kursk up until Donald Trump's swearing in on January 20th, so as to complicate any peace agreement, to make it more difficult for Trump to disengage. And so the caveat for these ATACMS weapons is that the United States has cleared their use in Kursk to strike Russian forces in Kursk, as if this is some sort of limiting factor that Russia won't respond. Russia has said that this will be an attack against Russia because it is an attack against Russia. Now, the source I spoke to today made it clear that there's no panic in Russia at all, that the Russians are very steely-eyed, clear-eyed. They know what needs to be done. They're ready to do what needs to be done, but they're not going to jump the gun until either Ukraine actually attacks them or they get an official statement from the White House that says this is what we're doing. Who is leaking this is the big question.
Yeah.
We know that the Washington Post outright fabricated a story, and that fabrication was designed to be disruptive to Donald Trump and his transition team. The sole purpose of that call was to create tension between Russia and the Trump team, and tension between the Trump team and the White House. It was a made-up story, fabricated. This is the Washington Post we're talking about. They made up a story. The New York Times is of the same political bent as the Washington Post. They are extremely anti-Trump. And so there is a distinct possibility, I would even say at this juncture, because there has been silence from the White House, probability that this is a manufactured story, that there are no sources, that these sources are made up, and that this is a deliberate effort by the New York Times, just like the Washington Post did, to manufacture a story designed to be disruptive to Trump. I think many people are trying to get the Trump administration or Trump transition team to aggressively commit to a policy posture on Ukraine by creating a set of facts and getting Trump to respond to them, thereby tipping his hand as to what he plans to do. Because right now there's a lot of unknowns about what exactly Donald Trump plans to do on January 20th when it comes to Ukraine. So I think this story could be an effort to draw that information out from the Trump administration. But the danger is that the sources are indeed from the White House. We know that Joe Biden is in the Amazon right now, and
mentally and figuratively, yes.
Yeah, his cognitive capabilities are diminished. He may not be the right guy to make this announcement. Kamala Harris is not the right person to make this announcement. And the question is who? Would Jake Sullivan come out and make the announcement? Would Tony Blinken come out and make the announcement? Lloyd Austin would be an unlikely character because he has been against this policy. If you recall, back in September, Lloyd Austin told Zelensky no. And when Blinken got ahead of the game and said yes, Austin called the White House and said, no, this will be a war that we don't want. We can't afford. We can't win. And again, that's another reason why there's a good possibility this is a psychological operation, because the Defense Department is dead set against this. They understand the consequences. They don't believe that Russia is bluffing. But we could see a Biden administration at war with itself. Tony Blinken is out there aggressively saying, we will send money every single day to Ukraine up until the time we can no longer send money. He's very aggressive on this. So we may be seeing some sort of internal fight between the State Department and the Department of Defense about this. Maybe Blinken had somebody leak this story to get Biden to jump in on it. Because what we saw is France and Great Britain and NATO have all jumped on this story as if it's fact, which tells me that I would hesitate to think that Macron and Starmer and Rutte would be making official statements based upon a New York Times article. One would believe that there was a phone call made before they commit publicly. And we've seen Figaro back off. We've seen the Financial Times back off from this story because it appears that maybe Macron and Starmer did respond to a New York Times story, and there's nothing of substance to back this up. So if that's the case, we may live through the week. But if Ukraine does in fact attack Russia, as I've been told, the decisions have already been made. There will be no discussion. Very catastrophic results for Ukraine and NATO will be the product of it. And that means war. And that means World War III. That means nuclear weapons. That means we won't celebrate Christmas. I just want everybody to understand what I just said. For all the people out there saying, well, it's not a big, you won't celebrate Christmas. You won't celebrate Hanukkah. You won't celebrate Eid. You won't celebrate Kwanzaa. You won't celebrate anything. Life will be over forever. That's where we're at. So pray this is an information operation. Pray this is psychological. Pray the New York Times is as corrupt as the Washington Post has shown, because we don't want this story to be true. We don't. Zelensky seems ready to commit suicide for his country and take the world down with him.
It's going to upset George Soros, who desperately wants this. And let's just also pray that Vladimir Putin is as reserved as he seems to have been over the past few years, and is not taking any kind of bait in this. I'll get you out of here on this, Scott. What do you think the incoming Trump administration, it's a very interesting period right now. President-elect, he doesn't have the power yet. He has sort of soft power, but he doesn't have legislative power, and he doesn't have executive power until, of course, he gets in on January 20th. What do you think President Trump is going to do over these next few months as it relates to Ukraine?
I think what we're looking at is this is an existential issue. And so therefore, if I were advising President-elect Trump, I would say our silence empowers those who are seeking an existential fight with Russia. There is some hesitancy about the Logan Act, but the Logan Act has been deemed by many to be unconstitutional. Also, it doesn't prevent the president-elect from outlining policies. Normally, there's courtesy that's given to the lame duck administration where you say, you are the president, you make your policies, and we will remain silent. But Trump did run on a platform that was diametrically opposed to the Biden administration's policies. And on the issue of Ukraine, I think it's imperative that Donald Trump put NATO on notice, put Great Britain on notice, Macron on notice, Zelensky on notice, that on January 20th, all of this ends. And I would be even harsher. I would tell Rutte that on January 21st, you will cease to be the Secretary General of NATO, because NATO will cease to exist, because I will pull the plug and you can't exist without me. If you think you can take my country to war, you're wrong. And I would tell the British the same thing. We won't be there for you. If you want to do this, Russia has carte blanche to do anything they want against you. We won't be there because we don't want this war. And I would tell the same thing to the French. Now, that's a little bit extreme, but I think the president-elect needs to come out with a statement that says, we are opposed to everything that Biden is doing. This is not going to be the policy of the United States starting on January 20th. And anybody who acts on this policy will be held to account by my administration, because I'm telling you, the future of America is not going in this direction. If he doesn't make a statement like this, then Biden owns the narrative, and we may find ourselves in a nuclear war.
Amen. Scott Ritter, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, with your analysis, and hopefully let's pray for actually have a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.